Hi, Zach. How are you?
Doing good, Stanton. How you doing?
I'm going to do a little bit of reading today. It's from a text that appeared in the New York Times by Alan Francis um, quite recently. I think it was June 23rd. I'll read excerpts from it. It's almost something we could have written ourselves, but it's a little, we can expand it a litl bit. And in doing so, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to reach out to you a little bit. I know you get annoyed sometimes. You say, Stanton, if you want to say something, why don't you just say it? Because when reading this, I just pictured you. So the article is titled, Autism Rates Have Increased 60-fold. 60-fold. That's a lot. And this is by Alan Francis. I played a role in that. So it's a kind of mea culpa thing. I'm going to read various excerpts from the piece. Robert Kennedy Jr., Secretary of Health and Human Services, is correct that reported autism rates have exploded in the last 30 years. They've increased roughly 60-fold. 60-fold. But he's wrong about the causes. I should know because I am partly responsible for the explosion. The rapid rise in autism cases is not because of vaccines or environmental toxins, but rather as a result of changes in the way that autism is defined and assessed, changes that I helped put in place. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, I was the chair of the task force charged with creating the fourth edition of the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders. That's DSM-IV. By the way, I might want to point out that as non-mainstream as I am, I was on the consulting group for DSM-IV's definition of substance use disorders. And one of the least recognized things in the world is that DSM-IV and now DSM-V, which I had no role in, they got rid of me, are harm reduction documents. Neither of them says you get addicted to any drug. And neither of them says, well, here's how much, if you drink this much or take this many drugs, uh, you become addicted. They don't say that, they don't call it addiction to any of the drugs. And they say, well, the way you know a person has a dependency is by how many negative consequences it has. And that's just harm reduction. And with all modest due respect, I played some role in that. I was on the consulting group for DSM-IV substance use disorders, which did that. Um, Alan Francis has a little more to answer for. He's a more psychiatrically oriented psychologist. My task force approved the inclusion of the new diagnosis, Asperger's disorder, which is much milder in severity than classic autism and much more common. In doing so, we're responding to child psychiatrists and pediatricians concerned for children who did not meet the extremely stringent criteria for classic autism, but had similar symptoms in milder form and might benefit from services. You have any reaction to that, Zach? So, in other words, they say, well, let's expand this diagnosis, and that's how we can help people who have some problems. Is there
Right.
any, do you have any reaction to that line of thinking?
Yeah, it's going to be a good segue into what I have to talk about, which is funny. Uh, my mind goes to who are you as a person and how do we build you up? It's not, I don't look at deficits per se, just perhaps a list of strengths to strengthen.
So, you don't understand what the problem is. If a child, you work in schools with young people, if somebody comes to you and they're not exactly doing the best or well, you don't say, oh, why don't we label them with a disease? You think, well, let's see what's going on and be helpful around that. And we're going to go in the direction you indicated.
The best elementary school teacher that I work with now says, she has a class full of people who are ostensibly, they have some sort of disorders or whatever. And she just says, I'm a teacher and specialists come into my class and they're welcome. Everyone is welcome. I don't understand what it means that they're coming in. I will help if I can. My classroom is just the land of quirkdom, and I work with that. And I like that approach. People have quirks, and you work with them.
What a crazy way of thinking.
I know.
Where that elementary school teacher, of course, if she's coming through school now, that would be erased from her brain. And she's got a checklist. She would have a checklist of disorders. So I'm back to reading from Alan Francis.
Okay.
Based on careful studies, our task force predicted that the addition of Asperger's disorder would modestly increase the rate of children given an autism-related diagnosis. Instead, the rate increased more than 16-fold to 1 in 150 from an estimated 1 in 2,500 in the span of a decade. It has been climbing more gradually ever since. It is now 1 in 31. And that we're talking about children now. But let's jump on. The resulting explosion in cases included many instances of, here it comes, overdiagnosis. Children were labeled with a serious condition for challenges that would better be viewed as a variation of normal. They're playing our theme song, I think, there. Yours and mine, coming from different arenas. Classic severe autism had so tight a definition, it was hard to confuse it with anything else. Asperger's was easily confused with other mental disorders or with normal social avoidance and eccentricity. I think you and I would say that's sort of true with virtually everything you encounter in DSM.
Right.
I mean, they're all at the end of some spectrum. And if you want to go to the end and say, oh, they're like the worst case, they resemble that, that's one way to go. We don't go that way. We go, well, let's spot where they are. Now, here's the part that sounds like we could have written this. It is difficult to accurately diagnose autism spectrum disorder. There is no biological test. That's true for 97% of things in DSM. It's true of, they don't have a diagnostic test for any mental disorder virtually, and certainly for what we call addiction. They don't, oh, let's give them the brain scan and we'll know.
Mm.
Symptoms vary greatly in nature and severity. Oh, go figure. Clinicians don't always agree. Different diagnostic tests may come up with different conclusions. And they're playing our song here. And the diagnosis is not always stable over time. Zach, what's that phrase mean to you? The diagnosis is not always stable over time. What does that make you think?
Didn't we write a book called Outgrowing Addiction? That's what it makes me think, that people grow up and those characteristics that define them or put them in a category no longer do, because there are more things available at more things at their disposal to sink their teeth into that makes them whole and a person.
Oh, we interrupted Alan Francis. Let me finish the sentence he wrote. Not always stable over time, meaning that many people diagnosed as children no longer meet criteria for diagnosis if evaluated later as adolescents or adults. Oh, man. Crazy. Crazy. They kind of grow up, for better, or worse. So what's wrong with, increasing diagnoses 60-fold? What's the problem with that?
What I heard you say, I heard Alan Francis say was, if diagnosed later on, then they wouldn't meet the criteria. Once you plant the seed for someone that they are something, perhaps they won't go for a re-diagnosis. Perhaps they decide that they're always this thing. And so one problem is simply we have encountered similar problems with people who are unhoused in the cities we work in, where people start feeling comfortable. I'm an unhoused person in this community. And the challenge is, how do you bump up a community? You're more than that. Who are you? So people who are diagnosed so often, they may be getting a service that allows them to meet the structure that they're in for that period of time in their early childhood. But that diagnosis also paints a story about who they are, and it limits them, and it keeps them from just thinking about who they are as a person and what they add to the world.
All right. I'm just going to read the conclusion that Alan Francis comes to. This is his concluding paragraph. It's almost like us, except this is why what you just said, self-labeling. This is how Alan Francis put it. Social networking has also been a powerful force in increasing autism diagnoses. What's social networking? While online, communities can provide valuable information, support, social interactions, even dating opportunities. They can also promote inaccurate self-diagnosis. Inaccurate self-diagnosis. See, he's still thinking psychiatrically. We're thinking, well, who says there's an accurate diagnosis? There's just a person.
People do that. People do that. Is thinking. I know this line of thinking so well. It's like there's a non-autistic person who meets autistic people, and they're not really autistic, but they think they are because they met them. Right. So it's just like, who is autistic anyway? Is what you're asking.
This is especially true. They can also promote inaccurate self-diagnosis, which is what you were just talking about. This is especially true as more and more people with mild symptoms get labeled autistic. As it has lost its this sounds almost, we're not putting anybody down for adopting these diagnoses. We're saying it's a double-edged sword. We're saying people keep talking about avoiding stigma, and yet what we see often is professionals bestowing stigma, and people almost sometimes reaching out and welcoming it. So this is just the last sentence in his piece. As it has lost its dire connotations, some people turn to the diagnosis as a way to feel less shame and guilt around social awkwardness or difficulties in juggling tasks. So within the Life Process program, both as a private consultation that we're aware of, but also when we reach out to marginalized communities, we avoid that discussion. And sometimes in private consultation, in both, people begin the conversation by saying, well, am I addicted? Or am I whatever? You can plug in anything, but we're in the addiction business. And our response is, well, why don't you tell me what's bothering you? And, where it's affecting your life. Let's talk about your whole life. Let's talk about your qualities, then your differences. Let's talk about where you'd like to go in life. And let's talk about what changes you think that either you might make or that your surroundings might make will help you move in that direction. You and I are dinosaurs, and Alan Francis is slowly struggling back to the dinosaur. You began with your kindergarten teacher, who's sort of a dinosaur. She's sort of saying, well, I don't know all these fancy diagnostic terms. People come in my classroom, I welcome all of them. My job is to help everybody, accept everybody here, to help everybody here. If you have, I went to school when we had over 30 kids in the classroom. People are going to have a range of skills and not so skills, and some people are going to, you may have had a similar situation to me. I had a situation where I never sat in my seat, which in general, they don't like in elementary school. But my early teachers kind of saw I wasn't destructive or anything. And they kind of gave me a float pass. They say, at some point they say, Stanton, you might want to sit down now. We're going to do a test or, Other than that, I wasn't like throwing over flower pots or ripping paintings from the wall. I happen to be 79. I'm before they even had something called hyperactivity, and then they had there's something in between hyperactivity and adult deficit, attention deficit disorder. I forget what they used to call it. It was a brain term. I was even before that term. And I'm so that, I happen to write with my left hand and I happen to throw a ball with my right hand. So that's already, without doing a brain scan, people say, well, your brain's screwed up. You can't do different things with different hands. You're not allowed to do that. And so I staggered through life, for better or worse, with certain skills and certain not so good areas. And I created a life by doing the things I was good at and making a profession out of what I did well. And I ended up never getting, in some people's views, properly diagnosed. And so here I am, a 79-year-old reprobate, never diagnosed. Obviously, I'm not an average person, but I have survived, and I have created a life process program. And it's your, my view, that Alan Francis is slowly, he's an older gentleman by now, I believe, working his way back to the prehistoric space that your elementary school teacher occupies. Hey, people are different. Let's help them, respect them with their strengths and their weaknesses, maybe leaning a little bit heavier on helping them with reading or whatever, or attention, but respecting their artistic abilities or their creativity. And we'll go with that. No diseases, thank you, ma'am. So this article appeared, I think, June 23rd in the New York Times. I think in another, 10 or 50 years, maybe they'll get to our primitive point of view, Zach.
Because if everyone is autistic, then nobody is, I guess. So maybe we'll horseshoe effect.